Fortnite's competitive scene didn't collapse all at once. It didn't explode in a single controversy or die with one bad update. Instead, it slowly fractured piece by piece through arguments that never fully resolved and decisions that were never fully explained. And at the center of that fracture was something deceptively simple: how players aimed, how they edited, and what the game decided to help them with. And some people like to call this the Civil War of Fortnite. Keyboard and mouse versus controller wasn't just an input debate. It became a cultural war, one that shaped how players saw skill, legitimacy, and each other. In the early years, the difference between inputs felt natural. Keyboard players were faster, sharper, mechanically overwhelming. Their edits were instant, their flicks were precise. Watching the top keyboard players felt like raw mastery, every action directly tied to human input. Controller players, on the other hand, were seen as limited, comfortable, more casual. Aim assist was there, but it was more of a necessity, not a threat. A quiet correction that helped analog stick keep up with the mouse. The understanding held until Fortnite forced both inputs into the same competitive ecosystem and raised the stakes.
This is your road to the Fortnite World Cup. The Fortnite World Cup starts on April 13th, when all eligible Fortnite players from around the world will be able to compete in the weekly online opens. Each online open has a prize pool of $1 million. That's 10 weeks and $10 million up for grabs. And it's all online. In each region, the top performing players from the online opens will earn a spot in the Fortnite World Cup Finals in New York City to compete for their share of a $30 million prize pool.
As Fortnite leaned harder into esports, money finally entered the picture. At the start of competitive, the World Cup was the biggest thing pros have ever seen, and for the more recent pros, FNCS wasn't just about bragging rights, it was livelihoods, careers, identities. And when competition becomes professional, every advantage matters. Every mechanic becomes political. And for the longest time, throughout all of the arguments, keyboard always remained on top of the competitive scene, and that was seen all throughout the World Cup with only 6 players qualifying on controller, and the best placement being Lecce at 32nd place. For the longest time, it seemed that keyboard would always be dominant. But the tension truly ignited in Chapter 2, Season 1. The chapter reset felt like a clean slate, but under the surface, something had changed. Aim assist on controller felt different. Stronger, smoother, more adhesive, especially in close-range fights. Tracking with SMGs and ARs became unnervingly consistent. It wasn't that controller players suddenly became better overnight, it was that their strengths were now impossible to ignore. Clips would flood social media, controller players jumping into boxes and deleting opponents with perfect tracking. Moments where crosshairs stayed glued in ways players couldn't even physically replicate. And I know everyone has seen the clips of Unknown Army during the prime of aim assist, with videos getting millions of views talking about it. Oh my god, the voice crack. For keyboard players, this wasn't just frustrating, it was destabilizing. Their advantage had always been visible effort, fast edits, sharp flicks, clear mechanical expression. Aim assist didn't look like effort, it looked like software, and once that perception took hold, it poisoned everything. Controller players began placing higher, some started winning. And instead of being celebrated as proof that Fortnite could support multiple playstyles, they became a symbol of imbalance. Proof, to some, that the game was no longer rewarding mastery, but assistance. This is where the argument stopped being about numbers and started being about identity. Keyboard players believe skill should be fully earned. Every shot, every edit, every fight. Controller players believe skill wasn't just mechanics. It was positioning, decision-making, consistency under pressure. Both definitions were valid. Fortnite never chose between them, so the community did. This discourse turned hostile. Controller takes no skill became a refrain. Controller players fired back, reminding everyone that keyboard players had enjoyed years of uncontested dominance. What made it worse is Epic's silence. Aim assist values were quietly changed. Nerfs came without explanation. No design philosophy was ever communicated. The competitive scene was left to speculate, accuse, and argue in a vacuum. And in that vacuum, paranoia grew. As aim assist accusations spread, devices that could simulate inputs, exploit aim assist, or automate actions became the perfect villain. Even if they were rare at the highest level, their mere existence was enough. Every suspicious clip can now be explained away as cheating. Every strong controller player was potentially illegitimate. And during Chapter 2 Season 5, the biggest accusations would come to play that would make those accusations even stronger. Something that I, during the time, was guilty of, and still have to this day. Cronus Zen. A box the size of your hand that could emulate cheats with your controller, and it went undetected so long because it was registered as a normal controller. It caused so many accusations on pros such as Reet, Unknown Army, Mayro, and anytime a controller player beat a KBM player, they were accused of using a Zen. It wasn't until Epic would threaten legal action that Cronus would no longer have their own scripts, but even today you can access scripts for Fortnite. But back to the main topic. The war escalated from balance debates to distrust. Controller pros weren't just competing anymore, they were constantly on trial. Winning didn't bring respect, it brought scrutiny. Keyboard players, meanwhile, felt gaslit. They believed the game that they mastered had changed beneath them, and no one is acknowledging it. The tension reshaped the pro scene itself. Keyboard players switched to controller out of necessity, not preference. Entire careers pivoted. Others quit. Controller players rose, but with an asterisk attached to their skill. Viewers stopped trusting results. Competitive Fortnite began to feel less like a test of mastery and more like a system no one fully believed in. And yet, the war didn't end. It just evolved. In April of 2021, Epic Games shook the entire Fortnite competitive landscape with the release of Zero Build, a radical new mode that stripped the game of its defining feature, building. No walls, no ramps, no towers, just raw aim, positioning, and movement. For many players, it was a revelation. The mode leveled the playing field between controller and keyboard, forcing fights to be decided by aim and strategy rather than mechanical editing speed. It also offered a temporary escape from the growing tension over aim assist and the input debates that had fractured the community. For competitive veterans, Zero Build was both liberation and challenge. It highlighted fundamentals that had always mattered but were often overshadowed by towering structures and frantic edicts. Fans flocked to the mode in droves, seeing this as a fresh way to compete without the mechanical pressure, while pros debated strategies in a meta that was raw, brutal, and unforgiving. A reminder that Fortnite's heart wasn't just in its build battles, but in the player skill that transcended input devices. But even after the addition of this, it seemed that keyboard pros took over. But there would be one addition that for a while, once again, brought controller to the top. When Simple Edit arrived in Chapter 6 Season 1, it promised to make building more accessible, letting players edit structures with a single button press instead of having to use selective tiles. On the surface, it was quality of life improvement, a tool meant to reduce friction and speed up fights. But in practice, it became a lightning rod in the input debate. Controller players found it amazing, allowing them to compete more consistently with keyboard players in high-pressured box fights and quick rotations. For keyboard veterans, however, Simple Edit felt like a compromise to the skill ceiling that they had spent years mastering, a shortcut that eroded the precision and mechanical depth that defined competitive Fortnite. Its introduction didn't just change fights, it reignited old arguments, highlighting once again how Epic's design decisions could favor one input over another, even subtly, and reminding the community that the war between keyboard and mouse was far from over. But then, after only a few months, Epic decided to remove it from competitive, once again affecting controller players. And while writing the script for this video, I decided to give Simple Edit a try, and I noticed it helps a lot more in controller because you still have the freedom of aim assist helping out after hitting an edit, as well as you can't really predict when someone's going to hit an edit when they have Simple Edit on. Was it a good idea to remove it? In my opinion, yes, but in a lot of other opinions, no. For controller players, Simple Edit was a gift. Cleaner edits, less input strain, more consistency in high-pressured fights. For keyboard and mouse players, it felt like the opposite. A system designed to compress the skill gap, to remove friction that keyboard players spent years mastering. Edits. Once the purest expression of mechanical skill was now partially automated, simplified, normalized, it was horrible in a keyboard player's eyes. Once again, the game was helping one input more than the other. And also, once again, Fortnite didn't frame it clearly. Simple Edit wasn't controversial because it existed, it was controversial because of what it represented. Another step away from raw mechanical expression. Another sign that Fortnite was prioritizing accessibility over mastery. For controller players, it felt like overdue support. For keyboard players, it felt like erosion. Today, the keyboard versus controller war exists as a residue. In comment sections, in Twitch chats, and how players talk about real skill. Controller players are still forced to justify their legitimacy. Keyboard players still feel something fundamental was taken from them. Epic continues forward, silent as ever. The best pro to ever touch the game is widely considered as Mayro, who is a controller player, but you have players such as Peterbot, Booga, Clicks. Oh wait, actually, never mind. I can't think of what Clicks won anything. But they have all stuck out just as much as Mayro have. The war was never about aim assist. It was never about Simple Edit. It was about trust. Trust that the game rewarded mastery. Trust that the success meant something. Trust that skill didn't need defending. Fortnite didn't lose that trust in one update. It lost it slowly by refusing to define what competitive Fortnite was supposed to be. And once that definition disappeared, so did the unity. The keyboard versus controller war didn't destroy Fortnite, but it taught an entire community to doubt itself.